Hey everybody, thanks very much for joining. Generally speaking, the more important the issue is, the less it is discussed here in Washington, D.C. We talk about a whole lot of things, but most often stay away from the real issues that impact people's lives and impact our entire society. Let me give you just one example. Today, we are living under a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining our democracy. And it allows billionaires to control not only our political system, but our legislative process. That's it, bottom line. You think you live in a democracy? Well, yeah. You get one vote, Elon Musk gets one vote, but he also has the ability to put $290 million into a campaign to allow Donald Trump to become elected president. That sound like a democracy to you? Not to me. And increasingly, what we are seeing now as a result of Citizens United and the growth of super PACs are not candidates debating issues. That's democracy. You disagree with me, that's fine. Let's have a debate. But what you are seeing is competing 30-second ads that are funded by billionaire-controlled super PACs. So when you watch TV, you're on the internet, you see some group saying, citizens for this, citizens for that. In most cases, those are organizations that are funded by billionaires that are spending all kinds of money trying to defeat somebody or trying to elect somebody. And a lot of this began with this horrific Supreme Court decision in 2010, and by a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court decided that we are infringing on the free speech of billionaires if we just don't allow them to spend as much money as they want to destroy democracy. So that's basically what the Citizens United Supreme Court decision was about. So what's happened since then is that we have seen political spending going up by more than 1,600%. In the 2024 elections, 100 billionaire families on both sides of the aisle spent $2.6 billion. You got that? 100 families spent $2.6 billion. That was double what they spent in 2020. And I have every reason to believe that that is going to go up and up and up. So you're going to contribute $20, which we desperately need, we appreciate, and that is vitally important in maintaining our democracy. And Elon Musk is not going to contribute $20. He's going to contribute $290 million, maybe more in the future, who knows. So what does this tell you about our political system? It tells you that if you contribute, like Musk, $290 million, you become appointed by Donald Trump to be the most important person in the United States government. You become head of DOJ, and you now can implement your extreme right-wing ideology, break unions, throw tens of thousands of federal employees out on the street, cut back on Social Security employees at the Veterans Administration, and lay the groundwork, by the way, for the privatization of major government agencies. That's what you get when you contribute $290 million. But it is not just Elon Musk. In early July, just a few days ago, Republicans in Congress passed, as you all know, I hope you know, Trump's big, beautiful bill, which in my view is probably the most destructive piece of legislation passed in the modern history of our country. And this legislation provides $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. So all these guys who made campaign contributions, they're going to get it back in spades. You know, you contribute a few $100 million or $10 million, you're going to get that back big time in a tax break. Massive tax breaks for large, profitable corporations, and it's all paid for by cuts to Medicaid, nutrition, and education. In fact, some have suggested that this is the largest transfer of wealth from the working class to the top 1% in the history of our country. Further, as a result of this legislation, over 16 million Americans are going to lose their health insurance. And sadly, it just hurts me to have to say this, but studies suggest that some 50,000 Americans will die unnecessarily every year, because when you're thrown off health care, you don't have access to a doctor and so forth. Now, the point that I want to make is I don't want to go into this bill at this time, but I want you to think about something. Think about how every single Republican member of the House and Senate, almost everyone, there were a few exceptions, voted for this horrific bill, okay? Virtually every member of the Republican member of the Senate, Republican members of the House. Now, do you think, and I know these people, do you think that they don't know about the impact that these massive cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act and education and nutrition are going to have on their constituents? Do you think they don't know that? And many of their constituents, by the way, are working class and poor. The answer is they do know it. They're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. But they also know that if one day they were to have stood up and said, you know what? I represent the district, it's working class, it's poor, a lot of people on Medicaid, kids trying to go to college. I can't vote for this thing. What do you think would have happened to them the very next day? And what would have happened is one or another of the oligarchs or the big money interests would have said, you're not voting for Trump's bill, you are out of here, we are going to primary you. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a guy named Tom Tillis, who was a U.S. Senator from North Carolina. I don't know Tillis all that well, but he represents his state. Seems like a normal type Republican, but he made a mistake. He actually studied what was in the bill, and it turns out that that legislation would cause over 650,000 people in North Carolina to lose their health insurance. And having a sense of decency, he said, you know what? That's unacceptable. I represent the state of North Carolina. I can't vote to throw 650,000 people off the health insurance that they have. Well, you know what happened? The day after he made that public statement that he was not going to vote for this bill, Donald Trump issued a ruthless denunciation of him and threatened to primary him. You, Tom Tillis, Senator Tillis, you're voting against me. You are out of here. And you know what happened? A few hours after Trump issued a statement, Tom Tillis announced, I am not running for re-election to the United States Senate. He stood up, represented his constituents, and the billionaire class said, that ain't the way it works. We pay you to do what we want. You don't do it, you are out of here. But it was not just the big, beautiful bill, Trump's big, beautiful bill. We saw that in December of 24 in what was called the CR, continuing resolution here, where we had worked. Was actually, my staff were really much involved in this, working on a continuing resolution to make sure that the government didn't shut down. And, frankly, it was not the world's greatest bill. It wasn't. We were working with conservative Republicans. But that bill would have put funding, increased funding, into primary health care, into dental care, to mental health care needs, into nutrition programs for the elderly, and apprenticeship programs for young people. In other words, it was a reasonably good piece of work. It took months of negotiating between Democrats and Republicans. We were involved in that stuff. That bill was all set to be passed. And then you know what happened? Just as the Congress was set to pass that appropriations bill, Elon Musk sent out a series of tweets. And what he said is, you vote for that and he lied about what was in the bill. You're going to vote for that continuing resolution. We're going to primary you. You are out of there. And in minutes, legislation that had been worked on for months. Democrats, Republicans, progressives, conservatives came together. All that Musk had to do was send out that series of emails. It was over. That's it. The Republicans said, forget it. We're not supporting that anymore. But it is not just Musk, and it is not just Republicans. This system, political system, campaign finance system, is just unbelievably corrupt, and it impacts the Democratic Party as well. And let me give you a few examples of how big money and a corrupt campaign finance system impacts Democrats. While outspent by Republicans, over 80 Democratic billionaires donated tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars to help elect Kamala Harris to be president of the United States. I personally, many of you know, worked very hard trying to get her elected. But what ended up happening is all of that money from all of these billionaires heavily influenced her campaign. So instead of running a campaign that took on powerful special interests and made it clear that she and the Democratic Party were going to stand with a working class which is struggling terribly right now, instead of saying, I am with you, we're going to take on these billionaires, she ran a campaign designed not to antagonize the business community or the oligarchs. In fact, as some of you may recall, one of her main spokespersons was the billionaire Mark Cuban. Billionaire influence on Democrats goes well beyond campaigns. And I'll tell you another issue where it is very, very impactful. If tomorrow a Democrat were to simply say, you know what, I can't continue to fund this Netanyahu government. They're starving children right now. Humanitarian blockade. Netanyahu's a war criminal. You know what would happen to that candidate? AIPAC and other super PACs would say, you're finished. You're out of here. Just like Musk is saying to the Republicans. And they have a track record. So it's not an idle threat. They have already defeated, some very good Democrats, people like Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, and other candidates who had the courage to say, you know what, I'm not going to support more military aid to continue the war in Gaza. So what you have right now is a political system in which both parties are heavily dominated by oligarchs and billionaire-funded super PACs. And it is also playing out as we speak right now in New York City, where Mr. Mamdani pulled off a major upset, some of you may know, and defeated Andrew Cuomo, was the heavy favorite to win, because Zohran Mamdani talked about issues of relevance to working class people. And the city responded to him, and he won the election. He won the Democratic primary. And there's going to be a general election come November. And you know what's going on right now? As we speak openly, they don't apologize for it. The richest people in New York City are saying, we are prepared to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat Mamdani. That's it. That's your democracy. People spoke, the Democrats selected a candidate, and the billionaires are unhappy with that direction. In fact, one billionaire just the other day said it publicly, not embarrassed by it. He said, I met with Mr. Cuomo and Mr. Adams, the other two Democrats. Cuomo lost. Adams is running as an independent. And I think Adams is the superior candidate. I'm going to support him. Right out in the open. We, the billionaire class, like this candidate. So that's kind of where we are right now. This is an issue of enormous consequence. It impacts who wins, who loses elections, and it impacts our legislation. So we have got to now stand up, fight back in every way that we can. Short term, we got to make sure that Zohran Mamdani becomes the next mayor of New York City. We got to help in every way we can to see that he wins. Medium term, we got to make sure that super PACs are not allowed to play a role in Democratic primaries. And longer term, we've got to overthrow this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. So that's a lot to do. But if we want to save American democracy, if we want to have a government that in any way, shape, or form represents working people and not just billionaires, those are the things we've got to do. So this is a big issue. Not a whole lot of people are talking about it, but it is the most significant political issue that we face. You can't talk about healthcare, you can't talk about housing, you can't talk about education without talking about the role that super PACs play in allowing billionaires to dominate our government. So, a lot to be done. Let's go forward together, because at the end of the day, yeah, they got the money, they got a lot of power, but they are just 1%. Last I heard, 99% is a lot bigger number than 1%. So let's not let them divide us up. Let's stand together. Let's take them on. Let's beat them. Let's create a government that works for all, not the few. Let's save American democracy. Thank you.